Hello all, and this is the fourth screencast for Chapter 1, Science and Sustainability. So we're going to compare the difference between environmental science and environmentalism because they're two different things. They're not the same. So when we take a look at environmental science, as it says here on your screen, it's going to pursue the knowledge about the environment and our interactions with it. So that means that environmental science will go out and actually do the research, the investigation. They'll create models, they'll gather data, and they'll examine that data. The scientists that work on environmental science try to remain objective and free from bias. They try to control any variables that might change or alter their results, maybe like human interaction could be one of the variables that they would try to limit and control. Where environmentalism is going to be a social movement, and the social movement is going to try to protect the natural world from human causes and changes. So you've probably all seen protesters or organizations like PETA, and I'm just picking on PETA because that's the first one that came in my mind, but they're the protection and ethical treatment of animals. So organizations get together like this and they protest government policies. This still pops up, government policies and the likes. So these are going to be the people that you're going to see march on Washington to present their cause. They think they know the facts. They don't. They can use the scientific data that the environmental scientists have gathered. So that's an option for them, and they try to get people familiar with the cause that they have. So that's two different things. Where we know for science, and you've had a great experience with science, that this is a systemic process for learning about the world, and we test it and we try to understand it. We create models. We accumulate a body of knowledge, and this is going to be collected through a process of observation, testing, and discovery. And we try to develop technology that is going to help us get the results that we need. So what happens with science is as we begin to understand how different things function, we try to present this information so that we can set the world on a course to protect, maintain, and live healthy and sustainable. It's essential to sort fact from fiction as far as science is concerned, and it's essential to develop solutions to the problems that we are facing. You'll hear a lot of discussion that economists feel that scientists are going to be able to solve the environmental problems. That's their hope, so that we don't have to worry about global climate change or using our fossil fuels to the point where we cannot regenerate them. And that's something that we have to get away from, because we've got to be able to think in a way that it's not science, but it is the people that implement the proper procedures that are going to protect our public space. All right, so I've got a little spider. I'm out back, so if you hear the birds, I've got a little spider crawling across my laptop here. One of the things that we need to know is that anything that we do has to be accessible and has to be put in terms that's understandable to the public. So, we've got a lot of hybrid cars that are developing, and they're great as far as protecting the environment is concerned, but there's a lot of factors that people might not be aware of. The battery that is in the car is huge, and it only lasts about 8 years. So what do you do with it after it goes bad? Buying a new battery can cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. Tires to support the weight of that battery in the car, because it increases the weight of the car. The tires that you have to purchase for it need to be more expensive, more durable. So while there are benefits as far as, hear that truck go by? Trash truck. So as as we're thinking, oh gosh, we're not using as much fossil fuel, we're not putting as much carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere. Now what happens to the tires when they go bad? The expense, the battery when it goes bad. Do we recycle? Where do we dump it? So these are some concerns that we need to educate ourselves with. We also, we look at places and we think, oh my gosh, fires are so bad. But one of the things that we're going to learn is a lot of times fire is needed in order for other species to be able to survive. Gatlinburg, Tennessee, this past year just had a huge forest fire, damaged quite a bit of the Smoky Mountains, and people, of course, lost their homes, lost jobs, lost lives, and that's horrible. But what we know from forest fires is that there had not been a fire in that area for almost 100 years. So what that means is all the leaf debris and branch debris that had fallen down from the trees, they've now collected on the forest floor, and that's fuel. And we've learned that if we have prescribed fires that go very quickly through, it eats up that fuel so that you cannot have these huge forest fires that we saw in Gatlinburg in that huge destruction. They move more quickly through. So we do prescribed burns in areas to prevent big, huge forest fires from happening. So we've learned this through science, and it's an incremental approach to the truth. We don't accept the conventional wisdom, but instead we look at the evidence. We base that evidence on observation, and that's going to be a descriptive science. What do we see? How does it appear? What kind of organisms are there? What systems are in place? What processes are happening? We need to make sure that this observation cannot be manipulated by the experiments. Means that whatever we're observing, that our experiment does not cause any change to the environment that we're observing the organism in, or the action or process in, that it keeps it as natural as possible. And we have to come up with a way that we can measure the data. We've got qualitative data, which is descriptive, and quantitative data, which is numbers, and we've got to be able to implement both of those. So we've got different types of observational science like astronomy and paleontology and taxonomy and genomics that we've talked about. We also have our sciences are hypothesis driven, cause and effect. If we do this, then what's going to happen? You're going to see in AP Environmental Science, we're going to move away from the if-then statements of hypotheses, and our statements are going to be general cause and effect. You've learned the if-then format, and that's how we're going to make our hypotheses, but we're going to take away that if and then. We're going to identify the cause in our hypotheses and the expected outcome or the effect from that. So that gives us a target that we're going to research. And again, as all hypotheses, in order for it to be good, it must be testable. We must be able to go out and do that. And you're going to be developing your own labs, not every lab, but your own labs throughout the year. So you're going to have to be able to say, okay, I want to do this. What is the outcome that I expect if I do this in your hypothesis? So we have to be able to test that. To test the ideas, we can have different approaches to the problems that we want to test, and you're going to see this especially when we get out in the field. We're going to go to the Wissahickon Creek and we're going to wade in the creek, and we're all going to be doing different testing, and then we're going to pull that together and tell us what that testing actually means. So you have to be ready to make really insightful and careful observations, and you have to ask questions about those observations. Okay, I found this mayfly larva. What does that mean about the quality of the water? What does that mean about the health of this stream ecosystem? And that's how your thinking needs to be conditioned for this year. So scientific method, you've all seen this before. It starts out with observations, and these observations help us to identify the problem. We can ask questions then about those observations to develop the problem. From there, we can come up with our hypothesis, and hypothesis would show the cause and effect. If this happened, then this is what the expected result is going to be. We can reject that hypothesis if our results come up and say, hey, this wasn't supported. And that's what's important. That hypothesis needs to be testable. From this hypothesis, we can make predictions. You know, if I change the amount of light, or let's go with this, if I change the salinity of the water, then this fish type is not going to be able to survive. So we can alter how much salt is in the water and see what happens to an aquatic organism that would live in that, and we can make predictions from that. Of course, we have to test, and that would be a controlled experiment, and we would have to set up our variables, what we're manipulating, what we're changing, what we expect our responding variable to be, the response to that change, and of course we have to control anything that we don't want to be an influence on our results or our test. Plus we have to set up a control for comparison, something that would be under normal conditions. And then we can gather our results. Again, these results can fail to reject the hypothesis and propose a new prediction, or we could totally redesign our hypothesis and not necessarily start all over, but make adjustments that we need to make. So, based on what you've already learned about hypotheses, we're going to be looking at them as statements that tries to explain the question. That's where they're going to be a little bit different from sophomore year. These hypotheses we're going to generate predictions from. And we're going to get these predictions where they can be directly tested so that we can get results. It's a busy morning out here. We've got the helicopter going by is one of our emergency helicopters for the hospital. I live close to Abington Hospital, so that's why you're hearing that. We'll take a look at our results. We'll examine those results and we'll analyze them and decide whether they support or reject the hypothesis, and then we can draw our conclusions from there. Okay, so here is some marine research that is being done, and they're testing coral in this particular picture. Again, here's our variables that we were talking about. A variable is anything that we're going to change. Our independent variable is what is going to be manipulated, what we're going to change. And our dependent variable is going to be the results, what happens as a result of manipulating that independent variable. A controlled experiment, just a refresher, is one in which it affects all variables are controlled. Except the independent variable, because that's what we're testing. We want to have a control within this controlled experiment, and that's anything that's going to be unmanipulated that we can use for comparison. And we're going to hopefully collect both quantitative data, that's anything that comes in numbers that can be measured, and qualitative data that does not involve numbers but observation and description of what you're seeing. A lot of times people will confuse the control with a controlled experiment, and the controlled experiment is you want to keep the conditions as normal as possible, only manipulating one variable, one change. So if you're looking how the salinity is going to affect the fish, you're only changing the salt. You're not changing the temperature of the water or the amount of light or plants or anything else that might be in that area. And then you're going to set up a control which would be at normal salinity for that fish to be able to survive, or those organisms to be able to survive. So that's the difference between the two. All right, we're running out of time here. We're going to stop this screencast, and I will see you in the next one. Enjoy.